lots of calls, or criticisms, I should say, from the right and even from centrists saying that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Ron Wyden, who encouraged the Biden administration to just simply ignore the ruling from the extremist far-right judge in Texas that would, if enacted, end up banning the sale of one of the two necessary drugs in the abortion pill, Mifepristone. And AOC, Ron Wyden, said, hey, the court, they derive their legitimacy from the people, and they are ruining their legitimacy right now. They're setting it on fire. And I made this case earlier in the show, but we have a checks and balances system. The courts need to be checked. So time for the executive branch and the legislature to do it. Now, Nancy Mace is a Republican, and even she seems to think that this goes too far, this ruling by Judge Kacsmaryk in Texas. So here she makes a very similar case. Maybe the Biden administration just ignores it because a judge like this should not have the ability to ban and circumvent the FDA's authority and approval process, which I don't think he even can legally, but it depends. And that's why you shouldn't implement it, frankly, as this case gets worked out. On specific drugs. This is the first time a judge has ever banned a specific drug approved by the FDA, and that's what makes this so absurd.
I think that a judge in Texas should be able to say that an FDA's determination about a drug is invalid?
I don't. In fact, when you look at the court case and the ruling here, the judge used an act or a law from the 1800s that was overturned by the Supreme Court, or at least the Supreme Court decided in 1983, over 100 years later, roughly, that law was unconstitutional. And that was the basis for his argument last week. And look, this is an FDA-approved drug. Whether you agree with its usage or not, that's not your decision. That is the FDA's decision on the efficacy, safety, and usage of that particular drug.
Do you agree here then with comments from people like your colleague Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez that the Biden administration should ignore this ruling, that the FDA should ignore this ruling?
Well, this is the judicial branch and we have a court system. I do think that this is going to be relegated to the courts. There are other lawsuits that are going on right now. This is an FDA-approved drug. I support the usage of FDA-approved drugs, even if we might disagree. It's not up to us to decide as legislators or even, as the court system that whether or not this is the right drug to use or not, number one. So I agree with ignoring it at this point, but there are other lawsuits that are happening right now in other states as well over this issue. But to look at the case itself, when you look at the law that the judge used, an old law that the Supreme Court said was unconstitutional, this thing should just be thrown out, quite frankly.
So you think the FDA should ignore this?
I would. Yes, I would. This is an issue that Republicans have been largely on the wrong side of. We have, over the last 9 months, not shown compassion towards women. And this is one of those issues that I've tried to lead on as someone who's pro-life and just have some common sense. In the state of South Carolina, just a few weeks ago, we had some folks in the state legislature that essentially wanted to execute women who had abortions. So we've got some extreme views on this issue, but 90% of America is somewhere in the middle. And I think that 90% would be okay with listening to the FDA rather than a judge who used an old law that was determined unconstitutional by the Supreme Court. I think the vast majority of Americans would support that decision.
Yeah, and I know you think that you're part.
Well, let's play that a little more. I'm curious what this follow-up is.
Party has gotten it wrong on abortion, the way that they message on it. You think that the House majority would be bigger if Republicans were better. So what do you say to Texas Republican Tony Gonzalez, who suggested that the Republican-led House should consider defunding some of the FDA's programs if they ignore this court's decision?
Well, everybody's welcome to their own opinion. I represent a very purple district that is really a bellwether for the rest of the country. And I can tell you, far more than the vast majority, 60-70% of Americans are not going to agree with this decision. And there are many pro-life people that also, while they're pro-life, they don't want the government to intervene in this radical of a manner. And the FDA has a rigorous process that they go through on drug approval. approvals. Most of the time they get it right. When they don't, there are lawsuits regarding the efficacy of those drugs, and there's already another lawsuit. But what this judge did, the basis of his ruling, there's really no basis for it because he used a law that the Supreme Court said was unconstitutional in 1983. It's sort of a rogue thing that's happening right now. There have been efforts afoot, both in different states and nationally, to defund certain agencies over certain decisions. You see that happening on both sides of the aisle.
No, you don't. Well, no, you don't. I mean, maybe she's going to... Actually, all right. I'm actually curious. This is interesting. Keep going. Keep going. I want to hear what her example is for the left.
Those are tools that people can use, but I will tell you, we are getting it wrong on this issue. We've got to show some compassion to women.
Okay, so she doesn't give any examples on the left because there is nothing, except for maybe defunding ICE, which I'd be completely okay with. The ICE is actually younger than this drug, Mifepristone, in fact, because it was created in the wake of, I should say, younger than the FDA's approval of Mifepristone for abortion pill usage, because it was created in the wake of 9/11 and the war on terror. But other than that, there really is no effort from the Democratic Party to dismantle the administrative state. That's one of the fundamental differences between the Democratic and Republican parties. One that you can draw to, because both of them, in many ways, captured by capitalistic interests. The right is solely captured by it, or completely. The Democratic Party has some members that are better and some that are good, who are fighting back against it. But this is what is also interesting about the underpinning and scary of Kacsmaryk's ruling here, is that he's providing a roadmap for the Republican Party to continue to dismantle the administrative state. They've been trying to go about it through the EPA with the West Virginia case on this put before the Supreme Court, where they want to undercut the independence of these agencies and their ability to make determinations about what is safe, like the EPA and their scientists working together to say, this is how much can be in our water of this chemical. This is how much air pollution can exist for people to still have clean air. These are the caps on X and Y and Z. That is the discretion of our agencies. And the Republican Party and conservative activists are trying to make it so that these determinations have to go through our legislature. And we know that because of the filibuster and because of corruption and corporate interests and donations to members of Congress, that would be very, very scary, because Joe Manchin could be the deciding vote on what the levels of CO2 should be in the air for this region of the country. And then that ends up going back into his pockets, just as an example. So that's a Republican project, and now they're trying to bring it here to the FDA. The FDA has a process. It's not a perfect process, but they do have one, and it's statutorily mandated. And what the Republicans are trying to do with this absurd ruling is provide a roadmap for this to happen with drugs, not just with environmental regulations and other regulations. So even Nancy Mace on board with ignoring this ruling, given how extreme it is. But let's be clear, the Overton window is going to shift soon. And I would imagine that a lot of these right-wing judicial groups are going to start backing. Let's see if we can make sure that, the FDA, that its regulatory process becomes a bit more politicized. Because that doesn't just help them on abortion. That helps them on a variety of different corrupt agenda items that they might have.